they can say they want a new kind of democracy. And this new movement is going to be a fight for democracy. People are understanding that multinationals, I've never taped myself while I've talked before, but I'm working on a project, so I'm going to do it. Excuse me. Oops. People are understanding the inherent non-democracy of corporations and of international apparatuses like the World Bank and the IMF and the WTO, and they're understanding that they're powerless and they're screaming out for democracy. We have got to be the people who are going to come up with a new understanding of what democracy could mean. And I believe that this has got to be a feminist process, because if feminists are not thinking about this, it's going to be another irrelevant attempt to create a new movement. I believe that women have got to take feminism to the next level, beyond the cultural level where we've been, and beyond that reformist level where post-colonial feminism is now, to really talk about power. What would it mean for us to think of ourselves as the people who could govern society? And ultimately for feminists, and I believe the feminist project, and I've changed a lot over the last 20 years. I've really changed how I understand the feminist project, but I believe the goal of feminism is for women to think of ourselves as human beings. For women to think of themselves as human beings in all of the rich diversity of what that ought to mean. And what I mean by that is that human potential, which is distinct, I think in some ways, from the potentialities of other beings on the planet, is the potential to make culture, to think rationally, to be able to govern oneself, to live cooperatively, to have compassion. All of these kinds of things that we've always talked to be about as being feminist values are often coincidentally very much the ways that indigenous people govern themselves, that many non-Western people have governed themselves. These things are not feminist, they're humanist. These come from the human set of potentialities, this idea that human beings can live cooperatively, can be compassionate, and can be rational, and can think clearly and discuss intelligently with each other about how to make our lives and how to construct our lives. I think feminism is about women becoming human beings and demanding the social and political preconditions to become human beings. When you ask little children to draw a human being, do you know what they draw? A man. Ask a little girl, next time you're around a little girl, to draw a human being, and they'll draw a man. We do not see ourselves as human beings, and until we can see ourselves as human beings, which are the people who govern society, I believe feminism will never get anywhere. But the thing that we have to understand, and this is sort of my final point, is that it is not sufficient, however, to just create a direct democratic structure, a citizens' assembly, for instance, where we can all participate. That is not sufficient, because we are all still carrying around our social oppression, and we've all been oppressed in particular ways. And that movement from being a particular woman to a human being is a social one and a particular one. And so this process of power, taking our power, has got to be both political and social. And I believe that's what's got to happen. And I'm hoping that this new movement will be the place for that to happen. But I haven't seen it yet. But again, just to sort of highlight that last point, the voyage from being a woman to becoming a citizen, a human being who can govern themselves, is a very particular voyage that's about consciousness raising, it's about education, it's about all of us, men and women together, becoming committed to the project of liberation. Social liberation is necessary for political power and political emancipation. Those two things have to happen, and feminism has never gone into the political. We've stayed in the social sphere the entire time. And while we've been making our alternatives along the side, the IMF, the World Bank, Ford Foundation, Rockefellers have been up to whatever they've been doing all along, and things are at the point where they are now, which is pretty horrific. So I believe we have got to talk about how to redefine power. And in conclusion, social ecology talks about one way that that could happen. The vision, I wouldn't call it a model, because I don't like that, is called libertarian municipalism. And the idea is very simple and very general, and it's that people in cities, towns, and villages could create directly democratic communities that would be confederated with other directly democratic communities that are self-governing, and that they would be linked together through a common constitution. Okay, a common set of ethical principles that are direct democracy, municipalized economics, cooperation, ecology, social justice, and the like. And that we could replace both the capitalist and the state system with a new kind of democracy that is a direct democracy, that's a confederal system, and that this, I believe, is the only way for us to move beyond both the era of the social movement and the only way to transcend these global systems that we're trying to fight. I don't believe we're going to protest our way to a new world. You know, I think it's great that it's happening, but I do not believe we're going to. I believe we have got to regain our revolutionary nerve that we lost after World War II, after we saw the irrationalities of the Holocaust, and we saw the irrationalities of Western so-called civilization. As we've seen the failure of very authoritarian and centralized revolutions, we have got to regain our revolutionary nerve, and revolution has got to stop being a silly thing that people talk about, and people can say you sound like an idiot when you say it. We have got to regain our revolutionary nerve, and we've got to see ourselves, particularly women, as the people who can do that. Because otherwise we're going to be episodally going to Washington and DC and protesting and feeling like it's exciting, but going home. And meanwhile, the system will march on and all over us, and certainly all over people in the Southern Hemisphere. And last point, what blows my mind is that we live in a society that actually has vestigial forms of democracy. There are city councils in all of our towns. There are neighborhood assemblies. There are wards. There are directly democratic forums in our country where we can actually go and have power. Those are the sort of the germs, the seeds from which to build this movement. And yet we go to these mass actions where we're sort of fighting in places where we have the least power, you know, fighting to block an intersection. That seems to me so ironic. And I can just imagine people in the South who are living in military dictatorships looking at us and saying, what are you doing? In your own communities, you could actually be starting to directly, democratically express yourself and take power. Again, I do think it's important that we're protesting because it's waking people up and it's changing sensibility and it's getting some momentum going, but it's got to move beyond that. It's got to be brought home. And some faculty and students at the Institute for Social Ecology just published this. We brought this to DC. It's called Bringing Democracy Home, coincidentally enough. And it's essays on how to really radicalize the whole discussion around democracy. And I have some over there. People can get them for a donation, whatever you feel like you'd like to give for them. That would be great. If you don't have any money, you can take it for free, but it'd be great. We're trying to cover Xeroxing costs. But we're trying to animate a debate within this newly emerging movement around how do we really take that next step and seize our political power and see ourselves as the people who can do it. And again, I think there has got to be a feminist presence in this movement, or this movement will be completely irrelevant. So I'd like to open it up to discussion and comments and interrogation and questions. So, yeah.
I enjoyed your speech and my point of view. I was concerned about your suggestion that we move toward that humanist notion.
Yeah.
And I understand what the point is about that, but I'm concerned that I've had people in my classes when they don't want to say what feminism is,
Right.
will go to humanism,
Right.
and I think that's the way the issue.
Absolutely, it's reductionism. Reductionism is reducing the particular to the general, right? We cannot say, oh, we're humanists. Or I love that people say, oh, we don't need to have labels of gay or lesbian anymore because we're all just people. We all have fluid sexualities. But the fact is that you are particularized when you go out into the world, and you're oppressed in very particular ways, in particular times by particular people. So again, it's to understand the articulation, the link between the particular and the general, and to understand that humanism is a social and particular process, and it's about social liberation. Humanism is about social liberation. It's about feminism. It's about anti-racist work. It's about anti-ableist work. It's about all people who are trying to reclaim their humanity in particular ways. Because oppression is dehumanization. That's what oppression is. Oppression is dehumanization. So absolutely, people have used humanism as a way to hide behind their desire to not deal with oppression in its particular forms. And you saw that in the old left. Oh, we're all a humanist movement, and once we get rid of capitalism, we'll all be liberated and everything will be great. Well, not at all. You know, you can have a classless society, you can still have patriarchy. You know, you can have a non-capitalist society and still have racism. Absolutely. So there has to be, again, this sort of synthesis between the social and the political, the particular and the general. Absolutely. Yeah. I see the religion. This is such an interesting issue because at the Institute for Social Ecology, which strives to be a secular educational institution, a lot of people interested in ecology, Cold War ecology, came in with this sort of very spiritual orientation. A lot of people who are my students are very spiritually inclined and are often horrified to find out what a secular person I am, for instance. It's funny, I'm actually a very cultural Jew. You know, I do holidays and I'm very culturally identified as a Jew, but I'm not particularly religious. I think the problem with how we understand the relationship between religion and politics is that we conflate the social and the political. Again, let me say, I think that religion is a social practice, and it's inherently meant to be particular. It's supposed to be particular and subjective. Okay, it shouldn't be generalized. You would not want to say everyone must be Christian, I hope, or everyone must be Jewish, or everyone must be Wiccan. Okay, and we all must do it in the same way. You would not have general religious principles that would be expected of all citizens in a community. You would not make public policy about religion, okay, unless it was about a practice that was imposing upon citizens' rights and duties. I believe that religion should be and it is an inherently social practice that should be respected, but should not be confused with politics, which is public policy making, which is where we move into the citizens' assembly or the political sphere, and that is where we try, as best as we can, to transcend temporarily or hold in both hands both our sociality, our particularness, and our generalness, and to look for the common good. In the political sphere, what I would say is if you want to be part of my citizens' assembly, you know, if I'm say, a left green or something, I wouldn't say everyone has to be religious or has to be Jewish, but I might say you have to agree to participate in direct democracy and to support direct democracy. You have to agree to participate, to have municipalized economics, to not hoard private property in certain ways. There are things that you would generalize to people that would be political and not social. So I think the problem with how we discuss is we confuse the political and the social when we talk about religion. That there are general political policies that you can demand of citizens that you can't demand and you shouldn't demand, that you should not confuse with social policies that should not be generalized ever. You know, like there's certain things that are social and should be subjective and particular, like love. I hate those things. You have to love everyone. You can't make everyone love everyone, but you can require that people do not kill each other or steal each other's things or hit each other. Right? Those are political public policies. Those are not social subjective practices. So that's what I would say, I think, about religion. And the problem with fundamentalist religions, they would like to bring the two together and generalize on a political level, make public policy about religion. And I think that's very dangerous. Yeah.
I really enjoyed the talk, and I especially appreciate what you said about the sort of second wave of the victims and the orientation towards women from the South. But I think that one of the difficulties of reconciling, particularly with Universal, is that here we're working on change and changing our institutions, given that our institutions dominate
Yeah.
That army just is not another version of imposing what we think the right answers are, or the sort of way and how we should be set up.
Do you mean if I say I was proposing libertarian municipalism, would that be another sort of imperial invasion? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let me get this one. You're saying if we're critiquing corporations, are we imposing our... Say it once more. I want to understand this.
If we're trying to reform or reshape or reformulate these globalist corporations,
Okay.
in a way that's better,
Right. If we want to improve global capital, the way global capital does what it does.
given the global influence that they have, are we then just sort of restructuring the world in a sort of newer, better, improved vision, but still imposing our view of how things should be run?
I critique that. Okay. What I don't like is that in these new movements, this new anti-globalization movement, the best that people are offering, including Vandana Shiva, is reforming multi-corporate practices, reforming the IMF, reforming the World Bank, reforming the WTO. Reform. I find that to be very problematic. I believe that people with privilege who live in democratic situations should be using their political power to propose something different. Because there is a logic, it's an irrational logic, but there is a logic to corporations, the IMF, the World Bank, etc., that is a logic of centralization, of non-democracy. It's a logic of, I would say ultimately, anti-sociality. It's a logic of hoarding. It's an antisocial logic that I believe we in supposedly vestigally democratic countries could use our power to propose a different logic. Now, would I be imposing that on the rest of the world if I say as a libertarian municipalist, eco-feminist, social anarchist, whatever, am I imposing that? Sure, if I go in with a gun, or I can deprive people of resources. Am I imposing my opinion on you right now? I don't think so. I hope not. I think there's a big difference between dialoguing and trying to persuade through convincing arguments and coercing and forcing people to do what you want to do. The momentum for this movement would be us getting together, forming study groups, forming action groups, working in our communities, and inspiring others to join and to do the same in their communities. Right now, there are libertarian municipalist groups all over the world, and nobody went in with a gun and imposed anything. But what's really important, I think this is more to the point of what you're saying, this model, and I don't like that model, this vision must be general, because it's going to be done in different ways and melded with different cultural practices and traditions in different parts of the world. So people would do direct democracy differently in Africa than they'll do, the Native American folks will do in Canada, for instance. That direct democracy will be done differently in Chile than it'll be done in Burlington, Vermont. So these principles of direct democracy, non-hierarchy, cooperation, ecology, social justice have to be general enough to allow for a diverse expression of these principles, but coherent enough to be principled and to not just allow anything to happen, to let bad anarchy happen. Come on, there must be somebody who totally disagreed with what I said who wants to take me on. Yeah.
Growing up in sustainability, the critique is persuasive, but in the U.S., one idea that has brought communities together for change is the idea of creating a sustainable place.
Okay.
In other words, reducing the resource, our use of third world resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sustainability is a very important idea here in the U.S.
Okay.
and other developed countries, reducing
Okay. My problem with the word sustainability and the concept of it is it's like this with reform. It's about let's preserve the system and try to survive in it. Let's preserve the structure of the system and allow people not to totally die in the South. Okay, let's figure out, and it's no coincidence that the IMF and World Bank love sustainability. They love it. In fact, they love giving out money to projects that use that word because they love the idea that let's keep this system going and figure out how to make people try to survive in it. Okay? That's what it is. Let's figure out how can people survive global capitalism. Okay? Sustain in global capitalism. I find that to be perverse. Let's figure out how can we reform system enough so we can survive in it. I don't find that to be about freedom, and that disturbs me. And I find it to be perverse and decadent. I'm going to really go out there. I do. I find it to be perverse and decadent. When we actually could have the political power to demand freedom and quality of life when we talk about sustainability. When most of us are not sustaining at all in the North. We are not sustaining. We know it. We know we're not. We're choosing to live simply, which is a total luxury. We are choosing to sustain. That is not sustaining. I believe we have hit a point in history where we can do more than sustain. We know that. So why are we willing to reduce the terms of freedom to sustainability when we know we could all have a quality of life if we had a different structure? The eco and the feminism. Well, that's to go back to what is nature. The eco and the feminism is, what I would say is, if we're playing the game where ecology is the way we're talking about questions of development, for instance, then there has to be an eco and the feminism. I'm only interested in ecology because that's the way we've all agreed to talk about things at this point, things like land use, access to water, biodiversity. Okay, so the eco and the feminism is looking at what are the impacts of women, say we're looking at the post-colonial phase. The eco and the feminism is looking at what are the impacts of structural adjustment, for instance, on women, women's access to water, women's access to land, women's access to healthcare, et cetera. But the eco and the feminism for me, ultimately, is I'm interested in that potentially utopian dimension of ecology that we saw in the Cold War phase, that sensuality, that idea that we were embodied and that we could have pleasure and freedom. And I'm interested in figuring out how do you mix that utopian sensibility with a political analysis that would create the political preconditions for us really to have that quality of life, that sensual quality, meaningful quality of life for everyone. So I'm interested in ecology in a sort of epistemological way. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of framing questions. And I think it's a meaningful one still. It might not be soon. It's true. Ecology might be over soon. Globalization might be the new way we're talking about these problems. I believe that, actually. I think that ecology was the way that we talked about the problems that emerged as we moved from an agricultural society to an industrial society. And I think globalization is the way we're talking about the move from primarily industrial economy to an informational economy where the state has less power. I think ecology might become an irrelevant discourse, particularly as nature disappears. First nature, meaning, we might not have nature anymore. You might just have hyper-natures everywhere. Malls, Disneylands, gated communities, virtual natures, artificial life, virtual natures. Seriously, ecology might be an irrelevant discourse in 10 to 20 years. But for now, it's still useful discourse. It's a way we talk about important problems. So there has to be an eco and the feminism if that's the way we're going to talk about things. And feminism has to be part of that, just that way of talking. And everybody totally agreed. Nobody has something troubling concept. Anything more you'd like to hear about, or any pragmatists who say, "What the hell are you talking about? You want a revolution?" Everybody think we should have a revolution here? You think so? Yeah.
How once you free your desire things, something I've seen in my own life is that one's desire is to have families, to have peace and conflict. And that's been very hard for me actually here in the U.S. in my relationship.
Sure.
As a non-shaken woman, I've shame. And then currently,
Wow.
in my new relationship, my fiance doesn't want to go out in public if I have my hair showing. And so,
Wow.
even here in the U.S.,
Oh, yeah.
there's a conflict.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to have a life for yourself with people you love. Think how much worse it must be if you're in a society where everybody agrees and are supposed to be dominant. So I'm just wondering, what is it like for a woman living in Mexico where you have to accept that you're going to have a family, you're going to be in a situation where maybe you have to have more children than you would want. So I'd like to comment on this, if you can, people's desires to have freedom and how you have to sacrifice them, some people say, to have a full human life as much as possible.
Boy, that is such an intense question. And there's so much in what you just said that it's just like bursting out of itself. Yeah, no, it's really incredible. It's really incredible. Well, I'll sort of look at the two sort of snapshots you gave. The woman in Mexico, who's has so many material, everyday survival sort of demands on her. How does she be free? Well, here's the irony. People I know who've been to Latin America often say the irony is that often there's a lot more quality of life communally, on a community level than there is in the North. That people often do have a lot more quality of life in terms of sharing meals, sharing music, sharing dance, sharing social relationships in an extended family network. So there is, I'm not saying that you're either living in dire need and you have no quality of life and no desires fulfilled, or you're in abundance. But I think, looking at the woman in Mexico, how would a woman there try to fulfill her own desires? Again, in my book, I really distinguish between individual desire and social desire. Okay, I believe that what we need to do is to understand our social desire, which is our desire to be social, to be part of a social whole greater than ourselves, that we need to express that social desire in revolutionary terms. And I see that actually happening in the Zapatista movement in Mexico. It's funny that you mentioned Mexico. And there are women who are really active in that movement and are expressing a desire for freedom in its most general sense. And they're actually talking about democracy a lot, direct democracy, and trying to create confederations of directly democratic villages. It's really wild. And they're linking that with that more personal struggle for freedom. But again, I think that what you'd see in Mexico is the need to bring those two together, that liberation as a woman, the social oppression of women in particular ways has to be liberated, while you're fighting for that social desire to have a better society. And on to you, you're speaking to the fact that the feminist project is entirely unfinished here. In fact, it's gone backwards in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of women could have hairy legs. I mean, I started shaving my legs about 4 years ago. I had never done it in my whole life. I grew up in a hippie school and ended up in hippie land, in my late teens. I had never even done it. And next thing I knew, I had my legs shaved. We're actually losing ground. We're even losing that utopian, hairy, gushy ground that we had gained in Cold War ecology. That dancing in the face of death let us look a lot of different freaky, really great ways. And a lot of us have gone backwards, and I find that to be really, really sad. I think the only thing to do is we've just got to keep fighting. I mean, I choose my battles, and the hair lost, I went on to have a different battle, I personally, I had to make a decision. I couldn't fight that one, I couldn't go there. What was it? Oh boy, it's who knows? It's subconscious. It really is, and you start to rationalize it. Oh, I kind of do like the way that looks. It's, and if at the beginning I could say it was a novel because I hadn't done it before, right? You can rationalize all sorts of things. But I think we've lost ground. We have lost that juiciness, that righteousness, that flamboyant righteousness where, I walked around with the worst haircut for 7 years and didn't know it, We used to cut our hair in kitchens and I didn't care that I looked like hell. I really didn't. I thought it was great. I think that incredible lack of self-consciousness, where women walking around looking like whatever, has really been lost. I think where a lot of us have become a lot more self-conscious. I look totally straight now. I used to look like a freak. I really did. I did. And maybe part of that's aging, sort of making decisions around how you want to present yourself. I've also lived in France a lot the last 3 years, and that had a lot to do with it, a lot. But, we've lost ground. And how do we get that back? I think it's through organizing, but I also don't think we want to just get caught in that cultural trap, because I don't think having hairy legs really changed the World Bank a whole lot. So. Yeah. Right. Well, see, I am proposing something very different than running for office. I mean, this is libertarian municipalism is really about reclaiming legitimate, and for me, I'll be very honest, I'm anti-state. So, for me, a legitimate political institution is everything below the state. It's the city, it's the town, it's the village, and in a very megalopolis like New York City would be the neighborhood. But you don't know that. It depends who you're going to work with and where you're going to live. And you might not start this in a place where you're not going to have much success, or you might just be happy enough to be marginal. I mean, this is about being marginal, folks. This is not. If you want to be, if you want to be in the majority, just walk out the door and go work for Monsanto. I mean, you have to be willing to be marginal, and it's always from the margins that change comes. I mean, people in Seattle, do you know how many people that was who started that? I can tell you, they were a lot of my students at the Institute for Social Ecology. I'm so proud. Or the troublemakers behind the Direct Action Network in Seattle and now in DC. They're like everywhere. They're very few people and willing to be marginal. I think it's willing to be marginal, and you can only do it if you have a few other marginal people with you so you don't go insane. But you have to be willing to be marginal for a long time in your community, and you have to hope that you can speak, as women, we can learn to speak with conviction and in a convincing way, and they'll stop looking at your legs. Or who knows, maybe you decide to shave your legs for a certain reason, for a certain time, and sell out in a certain way to talk to people, whatever. I mean, I did that for France, definitely. I mean, if I had my hairy legs, I'm sorry, but I'm an anthropologist, and I'm writing ethnography, and I work with farmers and molecular biologists studying genetically engineered organisms, so the debate over it. And they would not talk to me if I had hairy armpits and hairy legs. They just would not. Thus, there it went. But I think we make all sorts of decisions about, yeah.
With that legitimate system in place that you're proposing, the one thing that seems might have to happen is some kind of revolution, some kind of redistribution as well. And that seems a precondition of a libertarian municipality.
It's municipalizing the economy. Okay, here's this concept. What would a post-capitalist world look like? It would be a municipalized economy where citizens ran the economy. In the old left, who was going to run the economy? Workers. In this vision, it would be citizens. It would be us would get together in a community, and we would decide the needs and desires of that community, how to produce for the common good and how to distribute it. That would be a municipalized economy. It would be a moral economy, meaning it's not, the goal of production is not profit and capital, but it is to produce, to distribute for the common good. We had moral economies in this world for thousands and thousands of years. Capitalism is a very recent phenomenon. Even within the feudal system, there was actually a moral economy within the feudal commune. More people know that. But the lord took a percentage of what people made, and the rest people bartered. There was very elaborate bartering systems. There was really no money going on. So it would be a municipalized economy where citizens manage their own economy.
With the revolution, it seems the revolution would have to demand redistribution or some kind of revolution or break through the current system.
Yeah, the revolution is a process called dual power, where there would become an increasing tension between locally self-governing municipalities, communities, towns, cities, and villages, and the state and capital. And there would be a contest of legitimacy. And the hope is that as you win people over into your position, the hope is that you start to, those would actually be hollowed out and would collapse. Maybe they'd blow you up or raid like they raided our center in DC this week. I'm not saying it's going to be all pretty, but I don't think it's going to be an insurrectionary revolution where we come in with a tank into the center I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't believe it can be violent. I think it has to be nonviolent and rational and not crazy. So, I'll just hang out and chat informally if people want to hang out and chat informally, and you can check out. I have literature. I should have said it before. I met this guy on the plane on the way back from D.C. who just blew my mind, who told me about this woman named Lori Berenson. Have people heard of her? It blew my mind. And if you could take, a leaflet and Xerox it and just put them places. She's a woman from, she was a young woman, a journalist, 25 years old, who was studying women in Peru who were fighting against unfair structural adjustment programs on women in Peru. And she was arrested and tried and now has a life sentence in maximum security, solitary confinement for the rest of her life in a cell 7 foot by 9 feet, no sunlight, no electricity, no heat above 40 degrees, and Clinton is doing nothing to get her out. It's horrible. This guy for 4 hours is sitting next to him. He's telling me this, and I was just. So there's some leaflets about Lori Berenson over there if you want to pick them up. And again, just Xerox them, put them places, and there's, I guess, a whole movement trying to free her. It's really, really horrific. So, and take a Bringing Democracy Home. I'm so proud of this. It's just little essays by our students. So thank you very much.